Overview of Literature, Week 4. This week we focus on Virgil's The Aeneid and Ovid's The Metamorphoses. Virgil grew up in Mantua, Italy. He had a very pastoral upbringing, meaning that his father probably owned land, and his poetry showed a nostalgic appreciation for the quiet life of the Italian countryside. The Aeneid is about the quest to found an empire. When Virgil was young, the world beyond Mantua saw great political and military unrest. New Rome was engaging in wars, struggling to expand the empire east and west and creating instability at home, which led to civil wars. Augustus Caesar claimed to restore the old ways of the Republic, calling himself the Princeps. Throughout his rule, Augustus was interested in controlling his public image and knew that careful manipulation of information was essential if he were to avoid the fate of his great-uncle, Julius Caesar, who was assassinated after styling himself as a dictator. Augustus knew that maintaining personal relationships with the writers of Rome would play an important role in his public image, and hoped that Virgil would provide him with a great national epic to justify and glorify Augustan Roman power. It is possible that Augustus had hoped for a more direct account of his own glorious deeds in Virgil's Aeneid, but likely realized this would not withstand the test of time. We've talked about epics before. We know that they're long, that they're usually historic and mythic, that they have themes or motifs. There's divine intervention, a heroic flaw. There's orality and performance, because these were originally oral traditions that were later written, so language was important. As a Roman epic, the Aeneid invites comparison to the great Homeric epics of Greece, while also attending to some of the critiques of poetry that Plato made with regard to Homer. Through its epic scope, large battles, sieges, and catalogues of fallen warriors, and needless to say, by beginning with the fall of Troy, the Aeneid refers and compares itself to the Iliad. So, too, through the lengthy voyages plagued by God's ill wills, travel to the underworld, and frame narratives told by the central character, the Aeneid invokes the Odyssey and compares Aeneas to Odysseus in several explicit ways. However, in scenes such as Aeneas' settling with Dido, and his sorrow in his hasty departure, and in the description of his shield, Virgil also demonstrates a sensitivity to tensions between the demands of the political world and the personal or domestic or contemplative spheres. There are several elements and themes that we see in the Aeneid, such as finding and creating a home, nationhood, parallels to historical romances, civil war and/or imperialism, and literary antecedents, meaning that Virgil relied heavily on writers before him. The love between Aeneas and Dido is not only important as a tragic influence in the epic, but because it also clearly depicts pietas. While Aeneas's recounting of the fall of Troy is a story that does emphasize his pietas in relation to the city, gods, and his family and comrades, Dido most clearly challenges or tempts Aeneas to abandon this virtue. Mercury's warning to Aeneas that he must leave Dido emphasizes duty, and Aeneas suddenly conforms his mind to the will of the gods and his destiny, though he still loves Carthage and Dido. Juno's enmity towards Aeneas and the Trojans is important for its emphasis of the historical continuity between the Greeks, Trojans, Romans, and Carthaginians, but it also serves as a potentially ominous warning about the future of Rome to Virgil's audience. Juno's hatred for Aeneas is based on the old allegiances of the gods found in the Greek myths and Homer's epics, and Virgil's use of this anger as a primary force in the Aeneid emphasizes this historical unity. It also obviously explains the root of the enmity between the Carthaginians and Romans. However, while Virgil's audience would have proudly regarded the destruction of Carthage as the triumph of Rome, Juno's anger at the conclusion of the work is ominously unabated. He was born in Sulmo, east of Rome. He was from a wealthy family, and he was incredibly smart and prolific. He was trained in rhetoric, but often wrote about sex and relationships. His poems were deeply psychological. Key themes in Ovid's works included change or changes, origins or creation, love, nature, chaos, good and evil, and the supernatural. As noted before, Augustus wanted to restore order and morals to Rome. He promoted marriage and traditional family structures. While he admired Virgil, Augustus was enraged by Ovid's poems. Their candid treatment of sex and adultery defied the order Augustus wanted. Eventually, Ovid went too far and was exiled to Tomis, where he lived alone and miserable for the rest of his life. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, there are contrasting epic elements. Instead of the length that we see in other epics, there's a series of miniature stories strung together where transitions are not unified and are often contrived. There is no single hero, and if moral values are surfaced, it isn't without irony. In the Metamorphoses, we see certain themes. Throughout the short stories within this series, Ovid reinforces the concept of never-ending change. Goal completion and historical or political gains are in a constant state of flux. To illustrate this with literary elements, the point of view often shifts, and stories come in quick succession with little or no transitions. Mimicking the true values of the Romans, the male gods are both lustful and abusive to female characters. Ovid calls readers to question extreme authority and the lust for control. This concludes the lecture PowerPoint presentation for the Norton Anthology of World Literature.